Hi and welcome to Let's Talk, all about books and good times going on in Auckland and online. Instead of her usual book review, Carole Beu of the Women's Bookshop is in shortly to tell us about the recent European event in which New Zealand had a starring role, the enormous Frankfurt Book Fair. I'll be diving into the magazine world to bring you my word of the week, which is all about magazine covers. But first, we put out a call to the Auckland Museum to ask them what their urban life exhibition is all about. Here to fill us in is Bethany Edmonds. Hello Bethany, it's great to have you on Let's Talk. Now, urban life at the museum, I gather this is a chance for young people to tell us about what sort of city they'd like to live in future. And this is really interesting coming from a museum, because I always imagine that young people think of, oh, fuddy-duddy museum full of old stuff. So how are you managing to make this happen?
Well, that exact attitude is why we've tried to engage young people into the museum and to showcase to them that it actually is not a place just for old fuddy-duddy things, and make it relevant to the youth of our city and a place that they want to come to and to experience all the amazing things that we have within the museum.
And so how have you managed to pull in sufficient young people to do stuff to get this to happen?
So it started as a community outreach project to access young people between the age of 15 and 24 to create a space that was relevant to them within the museum. So we've worked with youth organisations that are already operating around in different areas within Auckland City. We've teed them and their young people up with an established artist and asked them to each respond to an issue that is relevant to them. We've sourced the issues from the Macro Auckland report so that at the end of this project we can take the information that our youth offer to us to inform a report of sorts that we will introduce to the youth panel as part of the Auckland Council. So it's this really cyclic kind of
very circular sort
project.
Of plan,
yeah.
So what sort of response have you had from young people who've been involved? I mean, are they the sort of kids who would have come into the museum before, except dragged unwillingly on a school trip? Or, I mean, have they been surprised and delighted at what they've discovered?
Yeah, I mean, there's been this, it's hard to generalise because there's such a broad range of young people that we've worked with. But there are attitudes, I haven't been here since I was a kid, or I love the museum, you know, it's really quite varied. And it is, I thought I'd just go there and see rusty swords or those kinds of things, but actually being able to, because in the process of us introducing them to the collections, we've been quite specific about the types of information that we show them. Mm-hmm. So we've selected materials that are relevant to them, and I think that makes it easier for them to access. All
right, so give me a for instance.
For instance, one of our groups is the Ngāti Whātua Rangatahi, and most of them work for Ko Te Pūkaki Ecological Restoration Project, which at the moment for the past 8 or so years, they've been replanting Bastion Point with native plant life.
There's a lot of land there to replant, isn't
absolutely,
it?
yeah. So they're daily working with native plants. So when they came into the museum, we showed them Banks Florilegium, so some of the original hand drawings of our native flora.
So Joseph Banks was the biologist on Captain Cook's ship on one of his voyages, wasn't he?
Yep.
So and he did those beautiful drawings and engravings. So they're actually able to access that from centuries ago.
Yes, and compare it to the plants that they work with daily.
And then how have they moved that on into a creative project of their own?
And we also showed them photographs from the Bastion Point occupation as well, to show the kind of what their family have done to retain their land.
And that was 1960s?
1978.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so then we've matched them up with DLT, who is a hip-hop pioneer in Aotearoa. He's also a graph artist, and he does a lot of work in the communities using graffiti as a positive means of communication for young people.
Right.
So he's worked with these Ngāti Whātua Rangatahi to produce a graph mural.
Right.
And they've made stencils that have been derived from the plants that they work with, and created this mural piece.
Right. Is it wonderful?
It's beautiful.
Yeah. So so public will be able to go and see this lovely mural with all of its old echoes, but its new energy as well.
Yeah. And the beautiful thing about it is it's going to go into Māori Court. So Māori Court is full of all these traditional carvings that are kind of this one palette of reddish brown.
Yeah.
And then this is this beautiful splash of vibrant colour that's going to be right in the middle of Māori Court. So
sounds great.
Yeah, it's going to
Now
be really
I'm interested
exciting.
too in one called Talk Housing, where you've involved some people from a group called IMGI, which means these are young people from Glen Innes, which of course has been so much in the news lately with protests there about the removal of houses. So what have they been working on?
So we've teed them up with, again, a hip-hop producer, Matt Salapu Whaiamu, who is a hip-hop producer from the Hypnotics. But he's worked, and he also recently did the APO Remix the Orchestra, so he's worked with Auckland Philharmonia Orchestra, matching them up with hip-hop artists from South Auckland and doing this big kind of
fun
mash-up. So what he's done with IMGI is we've armed the young people with sound recording devices. They came into the museum and recorded the sounds of, we have a 2-metre long lali drum, wooden log drum, Samoan, in our Pacific Lifeways gallery. So they played that and they sampled that sound. They went into the community and interviewed people around the area about GI and about the housing issues. They got sounds of the birds from the park down at Tahuna Torea. So they've captured sounds of their community and then they've edited those sounds into a 6-minute soundscape.
Wow.
So
they went into a production studio and morphed it all together into something that's really wonderfully listenable, no doubt.
Absolutely, yeah. So they were, I mean, that's Matt's skill, is that he's, as a hip-hop producer, he samples sounds and turns them into beats. So the bass of the the bass of the lully drum becomes the bass drum beat within the soundscape, or they've got a bird sound that they've cued and sampled as part of the melody.
Okay, maybe the bird might come up repetitively against the boom, boom, boom.
And then there's voices and snippets of interviews and all sorts of things within it. So when you come into the museum, we're building a little house installation where visitors can step inside and be completely immersed by the soundscape experience. And it's surround sound as well, so you've got buses coming behind you and then things happening in front of you and all sorts of stuff. So
sounds great.
Yeah, it's very emotive.
And so there's one too about economic well-being. And so I see your information says the museum's galleries, manuscripts and the work of early feminist photographers. I'm not aware of the names of early feminist photographers, so are used for something new. So what's that all about?
So Massive Company is a theatre company who use devised theatre, where they will look at, they'll read a letter or they'll look at a photograph and then draw inspiration from that to devise characters. So we've given them the challenge of economic well-being, which is quite a big intangible kind of concept.
Yeah, and it could sound quite grey and amorphous and not that interesting too, couldn't it, until you get into it and think about what that really means.
Yeah, and so the technique that they've used is they've devised a human character, a non-human character, and then infused it with their own personal experiences. So, for example, one of the young ladies, Margaret Matilda White, is one of the photographers that we have in our collections, and she did a lot of work out at Carrington at the hospital taking photographs of the nurses, and she did all these kind of compositions with the nurses in their uniforms, and there's some really interesting photographic moments and little guys in the window looking through from the back and that kind of thing. So one of the girls became Margaret Matilda White in her performance piece, but she also talked about expectations on women in society that she wasn't, it wasn't the thing to do to become a photographer, so she actually left that all behind to become a mother, and there's all of those kind of social ideas which we tied into economic well-being because of the expectations that are put on to women in that particular time period.
Does this the young women who are working on that, does it surprise them that such constriction was laid upon women's lives in those days? Or, I mean, did it make it come alive for them? They probably knew it intellectually, but wouldn't have thought how sad that would be for someone who had to squash a talent. Yes.
And I think for them it's really relevant because they're all very passionate theatre practitioners, and that's kind of where they want to go in their lives, but how they balance that with getting a job to pay the rent or that kind of thing is it's something that they have to consider.
Have there been, just finally, any personal surprises for you in the work that you've seen emerging from this project?
I mean, every time I go to one of their workshops, I'm surprised and impressed by the articulation of our young people in our city. And I mean, two that spring to mind that we haven't talked about. One of them is Te Korowai is a program that works with young youth offenders, and so with them we address the issue of education, and because effectively they've all fallen out of the education system, so where do they go? They resort to a life of crime. That's something that's kind of inbred into their families and those kind of things. We enabled them with cameras, and they did photography as their creative output. And just
sounds fantastic.
Yeah,
sounds like a vital exhibition and on a very vital topic. November 3 it opens, Urban Life at the Auckland Museum.
Yes.
Good luck with it. Hope it goes well.
Thank you.
I spent years of my life as a magazine editor trying to figure out the right mix of words and pictures on covers to entice people to pick them up. You might think that's easy, but it's not. A little bit science, a little bit magic. Lately I've been on a judging panel sorting out entries in the Maggies, the annual awards that seek out the brightest, best and most popular magazine covers of the year. Our task was to cut 80 entries down to a short list of finalists. Here's fellow judge Jude Dobson scratching her head over the job. The idea is to give magazine creatives a pat on the back and to boost subscriptions. The good thing is that you can vote for the winners at themaggies.co.nz. When you do, you get a $5 gift voucher to use when you buy a sub, and every time you do that, $1 goes to the New Zealand Breast Cancer Foundation. It's a win-win all around. So get voting and help the cause. Winners are announced at the end of next month. Award-winning bookshop owner Carole Beu of the Women's Bookshop in Ponsonby is one of Auckland's busiest retailers of words on paper. A prolific reader herself, she knows what sells and is a tireless promoter of authors both new and established. She's just made a flying trip to the massive Frankfurt Book Fair, which was very special this year because New Zealand and its top writers had a starring role. And she's in to try to share with us just how stunning it was. Hello, Carole. Welcome to Let's Talk as usual.
Thank you.
This week, of course, we want to talk about Frankfurt.
Yes.
Now, had you been to that big book fair before?
No, I hadn't. And I thought, in my more than 20 years of book selling, I need to go to the Frankfurt Book Fair at least once.
Because everybody in the book world talks about and raves about it, don't they?
Well, it is the biggest book fair in the world by miles. It's totally mind-bogglingly huge. And I thought I have to go once. And so this was the obvious year to go because New Zealand, of course, was the guest of honour.
Yes.
So the country of honour. Every year they have a country of honour. It was Iceland last year, New Zealand this year. And at the end, on the final Sunday afternoon, New Zealand handed over to Brazil, who is the guest of honour next year.
Brazil's doing everything soon, aren't they?
Right.
Yes.
Yes.
Olympics and all. Yes.
It was an amazing experience. I mean, it's so huge, it's impossible to describe. I didn't go into every hall at all. I didn't go into the Asian halls at all. I went into the English-speaking halls and I went into some of the European halls just because the displays are just mind-boggling, huge and mind-boggling.
Yeah, I heard it was about the size of 6 Eden Parks or something.
Oh,
I mean, physically
yes,
it's enormous, isn't it?
I mean, the corridors, there's glass corridors leading between the halls, and they have those flat escalator things that you walk on, like they do in airports, to get you there. There was also, if you went downstairs, little minibuses running you back and forth between all the halls. They were so huge. And the New Zealand stand, which is where the publishers display all the books and actually do their deals and do their rights negotiations and actually sell the rights to other countries of New Zealand books. That was down in Hall 8 in the English-speaking hall, way down one end. Yes. And then the New Zealand Pavilion was right at the other end of the fair. It was a long, long way away. But the New Zealand Pavilion was totally stunning. It was dark inside, and the sky was the southern sky with the Southern Cross. Yes. And there were walkways and islands through water. It was actually very shallow water, but it was very dark, all on dark polythene. And so anything that was happening in the pavilion was reflected in the water. There were then huge screens, and they weren't flat screens, they were like big triangular screens in the middle on these various islands with with backless sofas, so you could sit on either side of the sofa and look at all these various screens, and they developed this wonderful film that rolled on a loop. And I mean, just to give you one example, I'll give you two examples actually. Though at one point, tukutuku panels came up on the screen, so they were red and black and gold, and then the tukutuku panels gradually merged into red and gold and black leather-bound books that when the camera came in close were ancient histories of New Zealand and so on. Another marvellous example was Hone Tuwhare's poem Rain, and a voice started reading the poem, and as the voice began, rain started falling from the ceiling into one of the pools, and at the same time the words of the poem started coming up from the bottom of the screen and gradually worked out. It was just magic. It was superbly done.
Sounds like lots of money got spent on this too, which is rather splendid actually, because often New Zealand doesn't have the budget to make a big splash.
Oh, well look, Ministry of Heritage and Culture, and I think Trade and Enterprise and so on, the government was very involved in it, and it was so worth it. It had a huge impact. On the Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, I could just go in and out of the New Zealand Pavilion at will. On the Saturday morning, I went to go up there, and it was impossible to get in. The public are allowed in, the German public are allowed in on Saturday and Sunday, and you couldn't get near the place. I had to queue to get up the escalators, to get even up onto the level where you went into the Emporium. And they had to regulate huge crowd control issues on Saturday and Sunday. They were delighted, the Frankfurt organisers. They said, you know, they've just had an overwhelming response. Word was out generally in Frankfurt that the New Zealand Pavilion was totally stunning and absolutely worth going to visit. So
there seems to be something about New Zealand that has long fascinated German people.
I don't
know if it's our distance or our strangeness or our...
We've got a strong connection, I think. Well, the Germans are very cultural and very interested in literature, and a lot of New Zealand books have been translated into German, and a lot more this year than ever before because of the fair. So there's definitely a strong cultural link between Germany and New Zealand. And of course there were New Zealand writers reading. Down one end of the pavilion there was a stage that you could pull a big curtain across and chairs sit on the other side of it, and there were lots and lots of wonderful New Zealand writers talking and reading, and they were all chaired by Germans who spoke of course fluent German and fluent English.
Yes, of course.
And could do both for the audience. And then that curtain could get pulled back, and so if you were at this side of the pavilion, what was happening on that stage when they pulled the curtain back got reflected in the water. So when the Kapa Haka group, for example, were performing, they were reflected in the water. And I just stood there and thought, you know, I've grown up seeing Kapa Haka groups. I have never seen anything as stunning as this. There they are twice, because they're performing there and they're performing in this reflection in the water. It was just beautiful.
So it really was a big deal for New Zealand there, being in this place.
And I went to a two-day booksellers conference, an international booksellers conference that was held within the fair itself, and that was fascinating because as well as, you know, the booksellers associations from America and Britain and so on, there were also people from Latvia and Japan and Russia and so on, and we were discussing the whole issue of e-books and so on.
I was going to say, how was the vibe? Yes.
Well,
did you get a sense that everyone's under pressure, the people who sell words on paper?
People are under pressure for paper books, you know, printed books. What became really clear for every single country there was that Amazon is the big enemy, the big threat for all booksellers, countrywide, worldwide, I'm trying to say, sorry, worldwide. But the other interesting thing was that one of the big issues that got discussed at the conference was what do small independents do about e-books. And I was there with Lincoln Gould, who is the CEO of Booksellers New Zealand, and Lincoln and I were able to tell the conference that we have just signed with Kobo. So New Zealand has signed with Kobo, and before Christmas all the independent bookshops in New Zealand will be supplying e-books on their websites, through their online shops.
So you'll be joining Whitcoulls and that?
Well,
Whitcoulls
already had it, and Paper Plus as well have signed. So Kobo have done a nationwide deal with New Zealand, and all the independents, or those who choose to be part of it, will have e-books as well. And so we're going to encourage people to buy Kobos, not Kindles, because Kindles, of course, are tied solely to Amazon, and Amazon is a huge threat because we don't want Amazon to be the only place in the world left where you can buy books.
Was there much of a emphasis on e-publishing for authors themselves, or is this essentially about the commercial transactions?
No, there was, as well as the big New Zealand publishers stand, where lots and lots of all the main New Zealand publishers had displays on the main New Zealand stand. There was another stand that the New Zealand Society of Authors had there, and that was particularly for self-published authors. and helping them to find overseas people who would buy, distributors and people who would buy the rights to their books and so on. Yes, so I mean there's a whole flourishing of self-publishing through ebooks, because it's much easier to do that now than it ever has been before.
I see the listener cleverly has picked up on that in this week's issue too, with a whole article about how to do it
before we'd announced Kobo, they wrote that article before we had announced that the whole of New Zealand's going with Kobo, which is a really exciting and positive move. I mean, the people in all those other countries at the conference were fascinated that we're going with Kobo, and a lot of them are going to follow our lead and go with Kobo as well.
Can you tell me off the top of your head how much a Kobo device is to buy? Is for
a couple of $100, I would think. I'm not sure yet, but not outrageous at all.
Yeah.
So quite reasonable.
And then that gives people like you a bit of a clip of the ticket on the way too.
Yeah,
then,
a small
does it?
clip,
Yes.
a very small clip of the
not
ticket.
as good as selling an actual paper book.
We won't make much money out of it, but it's
Yes.
very important to be in the game and to be providing that service for our customers. And I think most small bookshops and the good independents would agree with that.
Well, the two sides of publishing have to get very much together on this, don't they? Because you do, and people like you, such a valuable thing in promoting authors and holding functions and launching books and just getting the word out there amongst book enthusiasts. And the trade could not work without the human element in that, could it?
Absolutely. Yes. And that book knowledge and being able to recommend the right book for the right person is crucial. And
did you hear through contacts at the fair that some good deals were done as a result of New Zealand being there?
I can't give you any precise details, but the word was out that there were really good deals doing. Publishers were coming back to the New Zealand stand and saying, "Oh, I've sold this, I've sold that, I've sold this to so and so," and there was a buzz around the selling. There was more selling of New Zealand rights at this fair than there has ever been, I suspect.
And that's all about exporting, and that's overseas dollars that New Zealand needs. And I guess you're frantic at the moment with Christmas upcoming. What's likely to be the big genres over your shelf this week?
Well, there are some.
not this month, sorry, upcoming months.
Some superb big New Zealand books. Gardening, for example, Xanthi White and Linda Hallinan have both got out wonderful gardening books, lots of fabulous cookbooks.
Yes, all will be looking for them. Thank you so much, Carole.
It's a pleasure.
Yes, I know you've seen lots of flash mob entertainment. The last few years have seen an eruption of dancers and musicians suddenly do their thing in an apparently spontaneous, but actually really well-planned way, in crazy places like shopping malls and plazas and even inside trains and planes. But here's a new one that's a bit different and kind of touching, because the participants find themselves contributing to a Beethoven sonata, and many of them have never touched a piano before. England's Arts Council funded this appealing piece of theatre with the help of a company that installed a baby grand in a Newcastle bus station. They don't say on YouTube how long it took the pianist to explain to each passerby which key to press and when, but it's such a neat idea. I dream of the day when we might see some flash mobbing here that doesn't involve breakdancing. Thanks for watching. Next week we explore Secrets and Treasures, a gorgeous book by Ray Waru about some of the wonderful things in the 70 kilometres of shelving at Archives New Zealand, repository of curios relating to everything from love, war and disasters through to hokey pokey.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.